This is a story about a repository whose existence you were conditioned to accept as something natural, about an armored door behind which lies the memory of humanity, edited long before you picked up your first school textbook, about the silence in which, generation after generation, people were stripped of the instinct to recognize their own past. There will be no conspiratorial whispers here, no hunting for sacred relics. What follows is a cold reconstruction of what you have been systematically denied the right to remember about yourselves. At stake is the linear worldview you grew up with, that same straight arrow from stone axe to smartphone, ratified by men in cardinals' robes 500 years ago, and repeated ever since in every textbook, every museum, every popular documentary. 85 kilometers of underground shelving beneath St. Peter's Basilica are guarded more tightly than a nuclear facility. The fire suppression system there does not flood rooms with water. It evacuates all oxygen from the space in seconds, leaving a human being no chance of survival. A careful investigator will ask one and the same question. From whom, exactly, are you hiding parchment so thoroughly? Cartographic anomalies point to civilizations that existed at a time when, by the official account, our ancestors were barely learning to fire clay. Buried megaliths on the slopes of Turkish hills cry out about something that was approaching from the depths of space. An ash layer in a 3-kilometer Greenland ice core gives the precise time of the previous world's destruction. All these fragments converge on a single geographic point, and that point does not appear on your maps. And you, are you certain you remember your past in full? Or only the version approved for you by a committee that last convened 400 years ago? What matters more, the comfort of linear history or the chance to see your own species as part of an endless cycle of survival? If the answer has not yet formed for you, listen. This story is about how silence becomes the foremost instrument of power, and why your curiosity is being granted slightly more latitude right now than it was granted to your parents. Look at this section of the map of Rome. At first glance, the center of the Catholic world, St. Peter's Basilica, crowds of tourists, Renaissance architecture. But apply a ground-penetrating radar layer and strip away everything accumulated on the surface, and the picture changes completely. What appears on the screen is not a foundation and not utility infrastructure. It is a branching neural hub. 85 kilometers of shelving spiraling downward in tiered layers deep beneath the earth. What you are looking at is not merely a manuscript repository. It is arguably the most sophisticated and best protected bunker in the history of our civilization, commonly known as the Vatican Secret Archive. But here an immediate and fundamental question arises. Why would a religious organization store its chronicles under conditions exceeding the security standards of Fort Knox? Most of us grew up on the school version of history. We were told that time flows linearly, from stone axe to smartphone, from savagery to civilization. But that reassuring straight line is not science. It is a political consensus ratified 500 years ago by men in cardinals' robes. As long as you accept that narrative on faith, you remain vulnerable. You do not notice cycles. You ignore the obvious. Civilizations do not simply develop. They vanish suddenly, erased by catastrophes whose schedule may be stored in precisely these underground corridors. In 2020 PET, we no longer have any obligation to take the word of those who hold the keys. In this investigation, we will not cite myths, and we will not hunt for sacred relics. We will apply our OSINT protocols, open source intelligence, satellite archaeology, and spectral document analysis. We will look for what forensic science calls a trail, a paper trail proving that humanity is far older, more complex, and more tragic than we are officially permitted to know. Let us move directly to the site. For a tourist, the Vatican smells of incense and coffee. But for a data analyst, this perimeter looks fundamentally different. Through the eyes of an OSINT analyst, we see not walls and frescoes, but the thermal signatures of server racks and ventilation shafts, a critical infrastructure facility. Let us mark the entry point, a massive armored door beyond which begins the climate-controlled zone. Down below, in the depths of the stacks, temperature and humidity have not changed in centuries. This is not merely a warehouse, it is a preservation chamber for information. And the first question an investigator asks is this: from whom, exactly, are you hiding parchment so carefully? Let us assess the scale. 87 kilometers of shelving. If these documents were laid end to end, they would stretch from Rome to the Tyrrhenian coastline. The Church's official position is that only administrative records are held here. But any archivist will tell you, you do not build bunkers capable of surviving a nuclear strike to protect bookkeeping ledgers. Before us is a data mass accumulated continuously over 1,500 years. This is the longest unbroken memory on the planet, and access to it is held by only a narrow circle of individuals who have passed a loyalty vetting comparable to clearance for a nuclear launch code. Every tourist photographs the dome of St. Peter's, unaware that directly beneath their feet, the planet's largest classified bunker descends into the Earth, and its security system is more stringent than that of any nuclear facility. But the most alarming thing is not how the archive is guarded. The most alarming thing is what its security system guards against. It kills people, deliberately. Consider the engineering solution that speaks more eloquently than any words about the priorities of its custodians. The archive is equipped with a fire suppression system that differs fundamentally from the standard. When an alarm triggers, it does not spray water. Water would destroy the ink on the manuscripts. Instead, nozzles evacuate all oxygen from the room in a fraction of a second, replacing it with inert gas. A person caught inside will lose consciousness immediately and die within minutes. This is a ruthless but revealing logic. A researcher's or archivist's life is negligible compared to the value of the manuscript in their hands. The very term archivum secretum is the first clue in our investigation. Vatican linguists are happy to explain that in medieval Latin, secretum meant simply private, that is, the Pope's personal archive. But if this is merely private correspondence, why is it guarded by the Swiss Guard with modern automatic weapons? De facto, this classification long ago transformed into a top secret status that operates more strictly than the CIA or MI6. Words here have a double meaning, and our task is to expose the true intent behind that linguistic shield. There is yet another barrier that is not discussed publicly: the wall of time. Documents dated after 1939 remain almost entirely closed to independent researchers to this day. The official reason? Protection of personal data. But any historian knows that in precisely those years, under the pontificate of the time, the Vatican found itself at the center of the most complex geopolitical maneuvering tied to the Second World War and the laundering of Nazi assets. If they are hiding the truth about events 80 years in the past, imagine how deep the truth about events 12,000 years in the past is buried. In October 2029, Pope Francis unexpectedly signed a decree renaming the archive. It would henceforth be known not as the Secret Archive, but as the Apostolic Archive. The press framed this as an act of openness and modernization. But in the intelligence world, a change of name is a classic diversionary maneuver. While everyone discusses the new, softer title, attention is drawn away from what matters. The access structure did not change by a single iota. This is a rebrand of the prison, not an amnesty for its inmates. Let us reframe our view of the Vatican. Stop seeing it as a church and start seeing it as the world's oldest intelligence corporation. A century before the internet existed, they already had a sprawling agent network, missionaries, confessors, legates in every royal court and every colonial expedition. All information flowed here, to Rome. Reports of strange ruins in the Andes, of unknown stars in the southern hemisphere sky, of medicines and poisons. This archive is not a warehouse of dusty books. It is a database on whose foundation the power of the West was constructed. It is important to understand what exactly we are looking for. We are not looking for proof of God's existence. We are looking for proof of technology. To understand what is being hidden here, one must understand who assembled this collection. The Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and they were not monks, they were agents. Look at this visualization. Before you is not a map of the spread of faith. It is a diagram of the first global intelligence network in history. The Society of Jesus, officially named the Society, was created as a military organization, but functioned as a secret service whose methods of handling information preceded the founding of MI6 by 300 years. Its management structure mirrored a military hierarchy, and its operational principles were ahead of anything Europe then knew about counterintelligence. Every missionary dispatched to the jungles of the Amazon or the court of the Chinese emperor was required to keep what were known as lettres annuelles, annual reports. In these documents, theology occupied last place. The Vatican was interested in logistics, resources, astronomy, and crucially, the history of the conquered peoples. Reading these texts now, in the sterile silence of a restoration room under ultraviolet lamps, we see not prayers, we see dry operational dispatches. The monks describe strange ruins they stumbled upon in the mountains of Peru. Enormous stone blocks fitted together with a precision beyond the reach of even Rome's finest stonemasons. They reported structures surpassing anything contemporary Europe could build. This is where the central paradox arose that became the reason for creating the secret archive. How do you explain the existence of a civilization that cannot smelt iron but erects complexes more sophisticated than the Egyptian pyramids? By official doctrine, these people were savages awaiting salvation, yet their architecture said the opposite. They possessed technologies Europe had lost. For the Vatican, this was not a scholarly puzzle, it was a political threat. If the natives were more advanced than Christians, on what did the authority of the Church rest? The solution was simultaneously brilliant and cynical. Deep within the Vatican chancellery, a term was coined: mimesis diabolica, diabolical mimicry. The concept declared, if you observe something great and beautiful created by non-Christians, then Satan had specifically crafted this imitation to confuse the faithful. This legal formula gave the Inquisition free rein. The destruction of ancient knowledge ceased to be vandalism and became an act of piety. The most glaring example of this crime against history occurred on July 10th in a city on the peninsula. Bishop de Landa publicly burned scrolls and 5,000 Maya idols. The official version claimed the Maya heritage was completely destroyed, but profiling de Landa's actions reveals a curious detail. He was obsessed with studying the very culture he was destroying, and he compiled a detailed Maya alphabet that would later help Norizov decipher their writing system. The inquisitor who burned Maya books was simultaneously compiling their dictionary. This is not a contradiction, it is operational logic. Analysis of the logistical documents of the period indicates that the public bonfire was a show stage for duplicates. The most valuable and dangerous codices were confiscated and dispatched on the first ship to Cadiz, and from there directly to Rome. Only 4 Maya codices have survived to our day, 4 out of thousands. Statistically, this cannot be explained by accident. They did not burn. They were removed from public circulation. Look at the accession register from the mid-15th century. The ink made from oak galls has faded, but chemical analysis allows the text to be recovered. We see records of the arrival of crates containing pagan tablets from Mexico and Peru. The Vatican was not destroying knowledge, it was monopolizing it. Just as a modern corporation buys up competitors' patents in order to shelve them, the Church was confiscating any evidence of pre-flood history. Judging by fragments of the Jesuit reports, these books contain data on calendrical cycles extending millions of years into the past, on planetary movements impossible to track without optics, on catastrophes that had wiped humanity from the face of the earth long before the biblical first man. It was a chronicle that reduced the entire official biblical narrative to a brief episode in the endless drama of species survival. It was precisely then, in that one of the most influential cardinals formally separated the archive into a distinct, closed structure. And if you overlay that date on the chart of world history, what appears is not a coincidence. This happened at the exact moment when the flow of information from the New World became unmanageable. Europe had just discovered America, and together with Inca gold came a flood of inconvenient facts that did not fit the biblical picture of the world. The Vatican understood, information is a virus. If Europeans were allowed to learn that the Andes or India harbored technologies surpassing those of antiquity, it would have caused the collapse of the feudal order. The archive became a bunker not to protect paper from moisture, but to protect the world from the truth those papers contained. But every crime has a statute of limitations, and every wall has cracks. The Jesuits were too meticulous. They copied maps found in the ancient libraries of Constantinople and Alexandria before those libraries were ransacked. And among those maps is one whose very existence completely demolishes the school geography textbook. We are in the analysis center. On the table, a digital copy of a document dated 1513. This is not merely a drawing on gazelle skin. Before us is a highly complex data compilation. Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis did not conceal his sources. In his marginal notes, he states explicitly that he used approximately 20 older maps, some dating to deep antiquity. For an OSINT analyst, this admission is the key piece of evidence. Piri Reis was not a visionary, but a conscientious aggregator of historical intelligence data. Let us overlay a modern coordinate grid onto this medieval parchment. South America aligns with Africa with mathematical precision that demands knowledge of spherical trigonometry. Yet in the 15th century, humanity still could not calculate longitude to such accuracy. The chronometer would not be invented for another 2,000 years. However, the true anomaly that breaks official history clean in two is located in the lower portion of the map. Official science holds that Antarctica was discovered by a Russian expedition in 1700. Before that, the icy continent was considered a mere hypothesis. But on the Piri Reis map, drawn second years before that event, the outline of Queen Maud Land's coastline is clearly visible. And here begins what is most alarming for traditionalist historians. This outline does not match what we observe from satellites today. It matches what lies concealed beneath a kilometer-thick layer of ice. This is not a cartographer's error. It is a geological fact, confirmed in the Swedish-British expedition conducted seismic sounding through the ice sheet and established that the bedrock coastline of the continent looks exactly as the Turkish admiral depicted it. The only conclusion from this is, the primary sources from which Piri Reis was copying were created at a time when Antarctica was ice-free. No later than 60,000. Try to grasp the scale of this discrepancy. 6,000 years ago, according to textbooks, our ancestors had barely mastered rudimentary agriculture and copper tools. They did not build ocean-going vessels, and they most certainly did not conduct global geodetic surveys of polar regions. Someone else possessed technologies at the level of the 20th century, flying over the planet or sailing these waters, charting a continent still free of ice. Someone recorded this data in a drawing, and copies of it then settled in Alexandria, Constantinople, and ultimately in Rome. There exists an official letter from the U.S. Air Force Cartographic Division addressed to Professor Hapgood, who was the first to bring academic attention to this anomaly. The military confirmed, the accuracy of the Piri Reis map exceeds the cartographic capabilities of the 10,000 source, and its data on the sub-ice bedrock are correct. This is a document that legally certifies the existence of an unknown advanced civilization, and this document is merely the tip of the iceberg. Now let us ask the question that investigators on major cases are trained to ask. If Admiral Piri Reis was able to access this data at the periphery of the civilized world, what is stored at the center? The Vatican spent centuries buying up, confiscating, and hiding such primary sources. The map is merely a broken link, a fragment of the vast database owned by the Holy See. They know not just the outlines of continents before the Ice Age, they know who charted them and how. The map's projection indicates that its center was in Cairo or Alexandria. This confirms that the Library of Alexandria was not simply a scroll repository, but a data processing center for a prior civilization. When it burned, what was saved was not Homer's poems. What was saved were navigation charts, star catalogs, and technical drawings. The path of rescued knowledge led to Rome. The Vatican archive is the direct heir of Alexandria, with an access regime marked for official use only. Acknowledging the authenticity of these maps would mean acknowledging that we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but survivors on the ruins of giants. This destroys the Church's authority, built on the linear conception of history from the creation of the world. If beings with superior technologies existed before us, what need is there for an intermediary in a cassock? Cartography is power, and whoever holds an accurate map of resources and currents holds the world. The Vatican did not destroy ancient knowledge, it classified it in order to use it in the geopolitical game. If the cartographers of this lost civilization existed, where are their structures? The answer is in Turkey, in layers of earth that official science preferred not to notice for 12,000 years. If the Piri Reis map is a spatial anomaly pointing to where, we now encounter a temporal anomaly pointing to when. In forensics, this is called the destruction of the suspect's alibi. Official history maintains that humanity has an iron alibi. Before the appearance of Sumer and Egypt, we were primitive hunters incapable of complex engineering. But the evidence on the investigators' table says otherwise. On the left of the timeline, the biblical date of creation, 4000 BC, which served for centuries as the juridical foundation of the Church's authority. On the right, radiocarbon dating of the Göbekli Tepe complex in Turkey, 9600 BC. The gap is more than 5 millennia. This is not a crack in the theory. It is an abyss into which all of academic history collapses. Göbekli Tepe is the body in the closet of modern archaeology. Imagine discovering a state-of-the-art microchip manufacturing plant in a Bronze Age stratum. That is the comparable scale of the discrepancy. 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, when according to the official account, people were still learning to fire pots, unknown engineers were erecting a megalithic complex with perfect geometry and blocks weighing up to 50 tons, without iron and without writing. This cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Before us is a systemic failure in the matrix of linear progress. But the most important detail is not the complex's mere existence. This complex was not destroyed by war or natural disaster. It was neatly, methodically buried under thousands of tons of soil. This was a preservation. Someone was hiding technology until better times, as if burying a time capsule. They buried the temple themselves, voluntarily and methodically. This means one thing: they knew what was coming. And here the trail leads back to Rome. The Vatican spent centuries doing precisely this, burying inconvenient facts. Except instead of earth, it used security classifications and Inquisition bonfires. Acknowledging the existence of Göbekli Tepe civilization would mean acknowledging the cyclical nature of history. We are not the crown of creation, but quite possibly the degraded descendants of those who built these temples. For the Church, this is a death sentence. If engineers and astronomers existed before the biblical first man, the entire structure of original sin and salvation loses its meaning. In this context, a church council looks not like a gathering of holy fathers, but like the session of a crisis committee for information security. It was there that the canonical list of biblical books was ratified, and all texts mentioning events before the official beginning were declared apocryphal and confiscated. This was arguably the most sweeping operation of collective memory editing in the history of humanity. One apocryphal book holds particular interest for the investigation. Officially excluded from the canon, yet stored in the Apostolic Archive in complete copies in ancient Ethiopic, it contains what is essentially a technology transfer report. The text describes in detail a group of watchers who transmitted to humanity knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, medicine, and even cosmetics. From the perspective of a modern analyst, this is a description of contact with a more advanced culture that violated the non-interference directive. The Vatican knows the contents of these texts better than anyone. The cardinals understood. What the book describes as celestial chariots and fiery swords aligns with alarming precision to real artifacts that missionaries were finding in South America and Asia. The watchers of the Apocrypha and the gods of the indigenous peoples are the same actors. To preserve power, the Church had to convert paleocontact into demonology. Technologies became magic, and teachers became demons. The Holy See created a brilliant filtering system for this purpose. The procedure of advocatus diaboli, the devil's advocate. Originally, the role was designed to challenge miracles during canonization, but analysis of the protocol shows that the same methodology was used as a counterintelligence tool. Any artifact contradicting dogma was subjected to attack by skeptics hired by the Church itself. Their task was to find the smallest inconsistency and declare the find a forgery or diabolical mimicry. This was history's first troll factory, running on the discrediting of truth. On stele number Sorok tree, known as the vulture stone, the position of the stars is carved in precise correspondence to the date of a comet's impact. This is not a temple, it is a memorial to a destroyed world, and an astronomical calendar that has been screaming of danger for 12 no years. The warning was encoded in stone, but no one knew how to read it. What exactly destroyed this civilization? The answer is recorded not in stone and not in the archive. It is recorded in ice. If you are also struck by this scale and want the investigation to continue, give this video a like. Algorithms promote truth that has been hidden for centuries. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next installment. In a Syrian settlement on the banks of the Euphrates, archaeologists found evidence of how an instantaneous flash turned mud brick huts to glass. This was not a tribal war, it was the execution of a civilization from orbit. They know the threat comes from the sky, and so they are obligated to watch the sky. And they do watch, from a mountain in Arizona, with an instrument that has a very telling name. If we accept the thesis that the threat to civilization originates from deep space, then the Vatican's actions acquire a terrifying logic. When you are expecting a strike from above, you build not chapels, but radar arrays. A satellite view of the roof of the Pope's summer residence reveals a scene incompatible with spiritual practice. Telescope domes appeared there not for decoration. From the standpoint of open data analysis, this is a classic anomaly. Why would a religious organization, whose jurisdiction is limited to human souls, invest millions of euros in optics capable of conducting spectral analysis of distant stars? The answer lies in the software that is processing terabytes of data at this very moment. According to an insider source, text recognition algorithms are scanning digitized manuscripts, not for heresy, but by key tags: machina, sidera, ether, machine, stars, ether. They are searching for technical matches. The Vatican Observatory is one of the oldest scientific research institutes in the world. yet its ambitions have long since extended beyond Italy. When Rome's light pollution began to degrade the quality of observations, the Holy See took an unprecedented step. It leased land on a mountain in Arizona. The location was not chosen by chance. Ideal atmospheric transparency and a curious proximity to classified U.S. military installations. This is where VATT is located, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. Its mirror, manufactured using spin-casting technology, is so precise that if it were scaled to the size of the Atlantic Ocean, the highest wave on its surface would not exceed a few centimeters. This is not merely a fine telescope. It is a precision search instrument, sharpened for a specific task that does not appear in Sunday sermons. We analyze the spectrum of tasks this complex performs. Officially, astrophysics and cosmology. But if you look at the publication list through the lens of intelligence work, it becomes evident that they are interested in the infrared range, the frequency at which not just stars glow, but thermal traces, technogenic signatures. The Vatican is looking in the cold cosmos for something warm, something that consumes energy and leaves a trace. In 2010, a tectonic shift occurred in the Church's rhetoric that many missed. The Vatican's chief astronomer, Guy Consolmagno, curator of the Papal Meteorite Collection, made a statement that in any other corporation would have been called a strategic leak. When asked by a journalist about extraterrestrial life, he replied that he would be willing to baptize an alien, but only if it asked. Think carefully about that phrasing. If it asks implies communication, the presence of intelligence, and most critically, physical encounter. This is not an abstract meditation on the greatness of the Creator. It is a legal protocol for first contact. The Church does not develop dogmas for hypothetical beings. If a baptism protocol for another life form has been developed, then the probability of encounter is assessed as approaching 100%. They are waiting, and they know where it will come from. Here, two bodies of data converge. In the basements of Rome are stored the records of watchers and celestial machines from the past that we discussed earlier. And in Arizona, telescopes are scanning the sectors of sky from which, according to these texts, the visitors arrived. This is not pure science. It is the verification of intelligence gathered thousands of years ago. They are checking whether what once nearly destroyed humanity is returning. A noteworthy detail: the Vatican Observatory actively collaborates with a project using an instrument whose acronym sounds like dark irony: Lucifer. It is the infrared camera of the Large Binocular Telescope located nearby. Scientists, of course, will unpack it as a technical term, but for semiotic analysis, it is a marker, a light-bearing instrument gazing into the abyss to find their brothers in intelligence or old enemies. The data received from the telescopes goes directly to the desk of the Vatican's Secretary of State, bypassing the UN and scientific journals. Unlike NASA, which is obligated to publish reports as a structure funded by taxpayers, the Vatican Observatory is accountable only to the Holy See. This is a private intelligence network of cosmic scale, monopolizing information on potential threats. We are dealing with a monopoly on the future of humanity. If you too are unsettled by the fact that spiritual leaders are preparing for an encounter with extraterrestrials more seriously than the governments of major powers, confirm it with a like. This will help the algorithms show the investigation to those who are still asleep. And be sure to subscribe to the channel. Ahead, we will expose the mechanisms by which precisely this information is filtered before being fed to the media. But a critical question remains. Why do we hear no sensational announcements from Pope Francis about the discovery of exoplanets with signs of life? Because information is currency, and the Vatican holds the world's highest exchange rate. The knowledge quarantine mechanism operates today as well. It has simply gone digital. Let us descend from the heavens to earth, to the gray zone of bureaucracy, where the quietest crime against humanity is committed: the murder of memory. In the archive section marked in the inventory books as restricted from issue, an experienced archivist sees not merely shelves, he sees a cemetery of ideas. The smell of old paper here mingles with the smell of ozone from running servers. This is the smell of modern censorship. It no longer smells of burning bonfires. Burning books in the 21st century is inefficient. Fire draws too much attention. The Vatican has refined the method, transforming it into total knowledge quarantine. The task of this system is not to destroy information, but to remove it from circulation for precisely as long as it is capable of triggering social upheaval. This is the strategy of deferred truth. Look at the dossier of one thinker. For a historian, it is the tragedy of a scholar. For an intelligence analyst, a report on a failed operation to contain an information leak. He was the carrier of a concept about the plurality of worlds that threatened the church's monopoly. His execution was a crude analog solution to the problem. Today, such people are not burned. They are simply erased from search results. The model example of this temporal loop in action is the documentation from the pontificate during the Second World War. The Vatican kept those archives closed for 77 years. Access was opened only in 22 drafts. Absorb that figure. It is exactly the amount of time needed for all direct witnesses and participants to die. This is not coincidence. This is a regulation. Information is declassified only when it migrates from the category of political compromat to the category of historical reference that does not affect the current balance of power. If documents about collaboration with the Nazis were hidden for 3/4 of a century, imagine how long reports on the discovery of pre-flood technologies will remain buried. Within church bureaucracy, there exists a mechanism refined over centuries for discrediting inconvenient facts. The procedure of advocatus diaboli, the devil's advocate, officially applied to the verification of miracles during canonization. But analysis of the protocols shows that the same methodology was used as a counterintelligence tool. Any artifact contradicting dogma was subjected to attack by skeptics hired by the church itself. Their task was to find the smallest inconsistency and declare the find a forgery or diabolical mimicry. This was history's first troll factory, running on the discrediting of truth. Today, the archivist looks not at parchments, but at the blinking indicators of servers. The Vatican Apostolic Library is actively collaborating with Silicon Valley technology giants in the digitization of its collections. At first glance, this appears to be unprecedented openness. We are told, look, we are putting manuscripts online. However, any cybersecurity specialist will explain, whoever digitizes data owns it absolutely. The access algorithms for complete document versions remain closed code, a black box. We see only what the filter has passed. Digitization is the best way to hide the original in a deep access vault by replacing it with an edited digital copy. This creates an illusion of accessibility. You can visit the website and see a beautiful page of an ancient Bible, but you will never gain access to the metadata, to the layers beneath the ink, or to the documents that the system has flagged with the tag corrupted file. In the digital world, a disk read error is the censor's alibi. We are dealing with a paradox. The more information is converted to digital form, the easier it is to control. If the Vatican decides that a certain page of history never existed, they need not send inquisitors. A single command from a database administrator is sufficient to make that page return a chitirde error on every monitor in the world. The archive ceases to be a passive warehouse of paper. It becomes an active server that shapes our reality. But if they are building this digital fortress so carefully, then inside it is stored something that must not survive a system reboot. This is not a library. This is an ark. The word ark, for most people, conjures the image of a wooden vessel and a gray-bearded elder. But in the language of systems architects and survival strategists, an ark is an isolated container for preserving critically important data in a hostile external environment. If you look at the structure of the Vatican bunker through the lens of survival, the religious myth crumbles, yielding to cold engineering calculation. This structure is not designed to save people. It is engineered to save information. Kilometers of shelving descending underground, protected from nuclear strike, climate catastrophes, and biological threats. Why such redundant protection for medieval censuses and theological treatises? The answer lies in understanding what the Vatican considers its primary asset. It is not gold and not the faith of its flock. It is the source code of civilization, technologies, maps, and knowledge that allow society to be rebooted after total erasure. Here we approach the central paradox the Church conceals most carefully, the question of the nature of time. Virtually all ancient cultures, from Vedic India with its yugas to Maya civilization, perceived time as a cycle: birth, flourishing, inevitable catastrophe, and a new beginning. In this model, a global cataclysm is not the end of the world, but a systemic reboot, a change of seasons on the scale of millennia. The Judeo-Christian tradition effected a fundamental substitution, imposing on the world the concept of linear time, a straight line from point A, the creation of the world, to point B, the Last Judgment. This model turns catastrophe into a terminal point, an absolute end. Why? Linear time is the ideal instrument for managing populations. If you have only one life and one finale, fear of the future makes you compliant. Yet the architecture of the Apostolic Archive testifies that its custodians themselves do not believe in linear time. They are preparing for precisely a cycle. Their actions are identical to the protocols of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, except that instead of wheat seeds, in the Roman bunker are frozen the seeds of statehood, law, astronomy, and social engineering. This is a data bank designed to outlast a nuclear winter or a new flood. This logic explains the Church's maniacal passion for collecting and classifying pagan artifacts and heretical manuscripts. You do not destroy the blueprints of your competitors if you know they may be needed after a catastrophe. You hide them in the most reliable safe. When the waters recede or the radiation levels drop, whoever opens the hermetically sealed door of this bunker will be not merely a librarian, they will be a god to the survivors, holding a monopoly on the knowledge of the world that came before. The concept of the archive as an ark also changes our relationship to what are called the Dark Ages. Perhaps periods of decline are not accidental. They are an artificial pause, time during which elites who survived the cataclysm in their shelters dole out to a wildened humanity small portions of lost technologies, calling them divine revelation or a miraculous discovery. In this logic, the Vatican appears not as a religious organization, but as a transnational corporation managing temporal cycles. They know the schedule of catastrophes. They know when the trigger of a late cooling will fire, or when the planet's orbital cycles will again turn flourishing lands into glaciers. And while the rest of humanity draws up plans for perpetual economic growth, they are building bunkers for their servers. This is precisely why access to the collections is so tightly regulated. You are not shown the originals not because they are fragile. You are not shown them because a slave must not know that their civilization is merely one of many in an endless succession of attempts. The knowledge of cyclicality liberates from the fear of death, and a system built on fear cannot allow that. Official history is a curtain concealing the mechanism of a conveyor belt. We live in a world where the memory of the past is erased deliberately so that each new generation considers itself the pinnacle of evolution, while in truth being merely a new shift of workers on the ruins of ancient giants. The Vatican Archive is a time capsule, but the timer on it was not set by us. And judging by the acceleration of digitization and the tightening of security, the custodians know the time of the current cycle is drawing to a close. If this scale of cynicism and strategic planning strikes you as alarming yet logical, Confirm it with a like. Your interest helps the algorithms advance investigations that break the accepted picture of the world. And to ensure you don't miss the final conclusion about who exactly holds the key to this door, check your channel subscription. Dawn over the Vatican today looks the same as it did 500 years ago. The same marble columns, the same dome of St. Peter's casting its long shadow across the square. But this calm is deceptive. Throughout this investigation, we have assembled an evidentiary base that transforms scattered historical anomalies into a coherent picture. Admiral Piri Reis's map showing the ice-free Antarctic coastline, seismic data on an ancient climatic catastrophe, the buried temples of Göbekli Tepe. These are not random errors in textbooks. They are evidence. We have established that the Vatican operates not as a religious institution, but as an intelligence structure whose primary task is the monopoly over the primary source of our history. They guard not faith. They guard the right to decide who we believe ourselves to be. We call this the learned amnesia effect. You were made to believe that civilization is a straight line from the primitive to the smartphone. But the history of humanity is a cardiogram with peaks of flourishing and valleys of catastrophe. By concealing data on preceding advanced technologies and the causes of their destruction, the custodians of the past strip us of our survival instinct. We are defenseless against what may repeat itself. However, the rules of the game have changed. This time the prophets are not men in robes, but big data processing algorithms. Artificial intelligence scanning digitized manuscripts knows no fear of excommunication. Neural networks see patterns where the human eye sees chaos. They cross-reference climate models from 12,000 years ago with apocryphal texts in fractions of a second, faster than cardinals can press the delete button. OSINT, satellite LiDAR scanning of the Amazon jungle, and spectral analysis of ancient inks make any censorship technically impossible. The enigma of pre-flood civilizations moves into the category of a data decryption task. We stand on the threshold of the moment when the quantity of circumstantial evidence will convert into the quality of irrefutable proof. The main conclusion is simple and unsettling in equal measure. History is not what actually happened, but what the victors recorded and preserved. But digital memory, unlike human memory, remembers everything. Every deleted file leaves a trace. Every rewritten page has a draft. We are witnesses to the collapse of the longest cover operation in the history of humanity. The camera rises higher and higher above Rome until the eternal city becomes a glowing point on the map of Europe, then dissolves against the dark disk of the planet. From this altitude, no state borders are visible, no marble walls, only a fragile biosphere that has survived dozens of cataclysms. Perhaps encoded in its scars is the key to our salvation from the next strike. The question is no longer whether the truth about our ancestors exists. The question is whether you are ready to accept it when the last cipher is broken. And if you want to stay connected when we open the next layer, check your channel subscription. Truth needs neither the Pope's acknowledgement nor a seal bearing the Vatican's coat of arms. It needs only time and computing power. The sealed source of the past is unlocking before the eyes of those who know how to read data. All that remains is to find the courage to walk in and see your own true face. The case remains open. Delanda burned the Maya scrolls at a public bonfire, yet secretly preserved their alphabet and dispatched the codices to Rome. Would you have done the same?